Welcome back to the deep dive. We're continuing our multi-part journey into, well, the really fascinating world of attachment theory. It's a framework that, honestly, shapes so much of how we understand human connection and development.
Indeed. And we've built quite a foundation so far. In our first deep dive, we really got into John Bowlby's groundbreaking ideas. Attachment as this evolutionary imperative, a survival thing, really.
Yeah.
And that concept of internal working models, the IWMs, acting as these mental blueprints for relationships.
That's right. Then we moved on to Mary Ainsworth's, frankly, brilliant work with the strange situation procedure. It was amazing because it let us actually see these patterns in babies: secure, avoidant, resistant, and then later disorganized.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about how caregiver sensitivity influences those patterns.
And that key idea that attachment is dyadic. It's about the relationship between two people, not just, a trait of the child or the parent alone.
Like the dance itself, not just one dancer's steps.
Yeah, exactly.
And then last time, we saw how those early IWMs, those blueprints, they stick around. They really influence our adult relationships, our psychological well-being, even things like relationship status.
Yeah, we looked at it dimensionally too: confidence in relationships, maybe discomfort with closeness or that need for approval. We saw how those early patterns kind of cast a long shadow, impacting adult connections and, well, happiness.
So we've traced attachment from babies right through to adulthood, looking at its impact on us as individuals. Today, we're taking what feels like the next really crucial step, maybe the most profound one. We're going to dive deep into the question of intergenerational transmission of attachment.
That's the plan. How do these patterns, these ways of relating, get passed down?
Yeah, how does that happen? It's about how these blueprints, these sort of relational dances, somehow find their way from one generation to the next.
Exactly. Our mission for you, the listener, today is to get a handle on not just that attachment patterns can travel down the family line, but crucially, how this happens. What's the evidence? What are the mechanisms involved? Some are clearer than others, actually.
It's about understanding that legacy, isn't it? The legacy of our earliest bonds and how they might ripple outwards, affecting our kids, maybe even their kids.
Right. It's about how those early experiences might shape our children's emotional and relational paths, often in ways we're not even fully aware of.
That's a really powerful idea. So, where did this whole concept even start scientifically? How did researchers get the first hint that these deeply personal ways of relating might actually be transmitted across generations, beyond just, noticing family similarities?
Well, the first really compelling sort of systematic evidence came with something called the Adult Attachment Interview, the AAI. This was developed by Mary Main and her colleagues. And it was clever because it wasn't about watching parents with their kids.
Okay, so what was it about then?
It focused on how adults talked about their own childhoods, their narrative responses, their stories about their early attachment experiences with their parents. It wasn't just listing events, but more about the coherence of their story, how they made sense of it all.
Ah, so linking how someone talks about their past, their internal processing, to how their baby behaves in a strange situation, that feels subtle. A really interesting leap. What did they actually find? Was the link clear?
It was remarkably clear, actually, quite surprising in its strength at the time. Researchers found this consistent correspondence between a parent's classification on the AAI, like how they integrated and reflected on their own early experiences, and their infant's attachment pattern in the strange situation.
So, for example,
For instance, if a mother was classified as secure autonomous on the AAI, meaning she could talk about her childhood, good and bad, in a coherent, balanced way, her baby was significantly more likely to be classified as securely attached. Yeah. And this link between the parent's state of mind about their own history and the child's observed behavior, that was the first strong empirical clue. It suggested attachment could be transmitted, presumably through the environment, generation to generation, much like Bowlby had theorized decades before.
so our internal working models, shaped way back, are somehow influencing our parenting, often unconsciously.
That seems to be the implication. It highlighted how those internal blueprints play this profound role.
It's not just the events then, but how we process them, how we narrate them. That our sense-making of our own past sets the stage for our kids. That's quite something. Makes you think about how much is happening beneath the surface.
It's a huge idea, and the early evidence backing it up was really strong. There was a meta-analysis back in 1995, pooling results from 18 separate studies.
Okay, and what did that find?
It found a really robust correlation, Arkell's 0.47, between the parent's attachment pattern from the AI and their infant's pattern from the strange situation. Now, in psychology, a correlation of 0.47 is considered pretty substantial.
Yeah, That's a strong link. Suggests a pretty direct line of influence, doesn't it? If you were secure, your kid was quite likely to be secure, and similar for insecurity.
It definitely looked that way in those early days. It painted a picture of a fairly powerful transmission. But, science doesn't stand still. Research keeps going, methods get refined, more data comes in.
Right. So has that picture changed?
Well, fast forward to 2016, a much more recent, much bigger meta-analysis was done. This one synthesized data from over 95 studies across 3 decades. So way more data, way more diverse samples, nearly 5 times the data of that 95
Okay,
analysis.
the big update. And what did this massive synthesis show? Did that 0.47 correlation hold up?
It confirmed that yes, intergenerational transmission is definitely real. The evidence still strongly supports it. The phenomenon is robust. However, the strength of that link, it dropped quite substantially, actually.
How much did it drop?
The overall correlation came down to around R.31.
Huh. From 0.47 down to 0.31. That's a noticeable difference. What happened? Why the decrease? The first estimate just too high, or did something else change?
It's likely a few things contributing. One possibility is that those earlier, smaller studies might have, maybe just by chance, slightly overestimated the effect. But a really key factor the 2016 analysis highlighted was the inclusion of unpublished studies.
Ah, the file drawer problem.
Exactly. Studies with less dramatic results or maybe non-significant findings often don't get published. They end up in the file drawer. But this meta-analysis actively sought them out.
And what did those unpublished studies show?
They systematically showed smaller effects. The average correlation in the unpublished studies was only R.25. So including them gives a more realistic, less biased picture of the true effect size.
Makes sense. So it pulls the average down.
Right. But it's crucial to say, even with that drop, the link is still there and it's meaningful. In the most recent decade, they looked at 2006-2016, the correlation was still R equals 0.26, which statistically is significant and definitely not trivial in psychology.
So the connection is real, patterns are passed down, but maybe it's a bit more nuanced, a bit less deterministic than researchers first thought. Maybe more like a tendency or a predisposition.
That seems a fair way to put it. And the researchers also noted that the link was generally weaker in studies looking at clinical or high-risk groups.
Why would that be?
Well, in those situations, other risk factors, poverty, trauma, mental health issues, might exert such strong influences that they kind of overshadow or dilute the specific effect of the parent's attachment history on the child's attachment.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the evidence points to transmission, but it's complex. Which brings us to the big question, doesn't it?
How?
How? How does this actually happen? What are the mechanics under the hood?
Yes, the mechanism question. That's the tricky part.
And the first thing that springs to mind, based on Ainsworth, is parental sensitivity,
Right.
right? How attuned and responsive the parent is. Is that the main way it's transmitted?
Parental sensitivity is definitely, absolutely, a huge part of the puzzle. There's loads of evidence for it. But interestingly, even back in that 1995 meta-analysis, they pointed out something called the transmission gap.
The transmission gap, what's that?
It means that our standard ways of measuring parental sensitivity, usually through observation, while important, they don't fully explain the statistical link between the parent's AAI classification and the infant's strange situation behavior.
So sensitivity matters, but it doesn't account for the whole connection. There's something else going on or something we're not measuring quite right.
Exactly. Sensitivity is key. It's in the right ballpark, but it's not the entire story, or at least our current measures don't capture the whole story.
Huh. That's really interesting and maybe a bit humbling for researchers. It suggests this process is incredibly complex. So what could be filling that gap? Why isn't sensitivity enough to explain it all?
Well, there are several possibilities researchers are wrestling with. One is simple measurement error. Maybe our tools for assessing sensitivity just aren't precise enough yet. They might miss subtle but important interactions.
Or maybe they don't capture parenting in the real world very well, like observing in a lab versus daily life.
That's another point, ecological validity.
Oh.
Do lab observations really reflect the consistency and quality of parenting over time, day in and day out? Maybe not fully. Or maybe researchers are focusing on the wrong aspects of parenting. Perhaps there are other behaviors beyond standard sensitivity coding that are more crucial.
Like what?
Things like reflective functioning, the parent's ability to think about their child's mental states, or maybe specific ways parents handle stress or conflict. And then there's the possibility of third variables, factors that influence both the parent's behavior and the child's attachment. For instance, maybe the child's own genetic predispositions, their temperament, affects how they respond to parenting, making sensitivity more or less effective for that specific child.
Right, the child isn't a passive recipient. Okay, so it's complicated. This mention of genetic susceptibility leads right into that big nature versus nurture question. Attachment theory traditionally leans heavily on nurture, right? Saying it's mostly about the environment, especially caregiver sensitivity.
It does make that bold claim, yes. That variation in security is largely down to environmental factors, and twin studies are the perfect tool to test that idea.
Because identical twins share 100% of their genes, fraternal twins only about 50%, so you can compare them to estimate genetic and environmental influences.
Precisely. And what did the twin studies find for babies and toddlers?
Well, remarkably, they strongly supported the theory's emphasis on environment, but in a specific way. 3 independent twin studies, using good measures, all found significant and substantial shared environmental influence on attachment in infancy and early childhood. Shared environment, meaning things that make siblings in the same family similar, like the overall parenting style, the family climate, maybe socioeconomic status.
Exactly. And finding strong shared environmental effects is actually quite rare in many areas of psychology. Usually it's non-shared environment, the unique experiences each sibling has that shows up more strongly along with genetics. But for early attachment, that shared family experience seems really powerful.
So a big win for nurture in the early years. What about genetics then? Did they find specific genes linked to infant attachment?
Interestingly, no. Those early twin studies found very limited evidence for direct genetic influence on infant attachment security itself, and those earlier hyped-up findings linking specific candidate genes like DRD4 or the serotonin transporter gene 5-HTTTLPR to attachment, they generally haven't replicated. Larger studies suggest those were likely false positives. So for the littlest ones, the environment, especially that shared family environment, really seemed to be the dominant force shaping attachment.
Okay, so infancy and early childhood, environment rules. But does that picture stay the same as kids get older? Or does the balance shift?
This is where it gets really interesting and the story changes quite dramatically. That finding about limited genetic influence seems to be specific to early development. A large, well-conducted twin study looked at attachment in adolescents, 15-year-olds, over 500 twin pairs, using good measures like the child attachment interview.
And what did they find in teenagers? A different balance.
A very different balance. This study found strong evidence of genetic influence on adolescent attachment security and also on the coherence of their attachment narratives. They estimated that about 40% of the variation was heritable.
40%. That's a huge jump from limited evidence in infancy.
It is. And what's more, in stark contrast to the findings in early childhood, this adolescent study found no evidence of shared environmental influence.
Wow. So the things that made siblings similar in their attachment patterns early on, like the general parenting approach, seem to have faded in importance by adolescence, and genetic factors became much more prominent.
That's what the data suggests. It doesn't mean parenting stops mattering at all, of course. Non-shared environmental factors, those unique experiences each teen has, still play a role. But it points to a significant developmental shift, where genetic predispositions related to personality, social cognition, or emotional regulation might exert a stronger influence on attachment patterns as individuals mature.
That is a massive insight. That the relative weight of genes and environment can actually change across development for attachment. It really complicates the simple nature versus nurture debate, doesn't it? It's more like nature and nurture interacting dynamically over time.
Exactly. It suggests attachment isn't just passively received from the environment early on, but it's something that continues to develop and might become increasingly influenced by our own intrinsic characteristics as we get older.
Okay, so we have correlational evidence showing transmission, albeit maybe weaker than first thought. We have twin studies showing a shifting balance of genes and environment. What about interventions? Can we actually change attachment patterns by changing parenting? That would give us clues about causality.
Yes, and this is where the evidence becomes quite hopeful, actually.
Yeah.
Intervention studies, especially randomized controlled trials, RCTs, provide strong evidence. Meta-analyses pooling results from many RCTs show that interventions focused on improving parental sensitivity can effectively increase rates of secure attachment in early childhood.
They actually work.
They do. The overall effect size was moderate, around D equals 0.20, which means a noticeable positive shift towards security in the intervention groups compared to control groups.
So directly teaching and supporting parents to be more sensitive and responsive does lead to more secure kids. That's pretty direct support for Ainsworth's original hypothesis, isn't it? sensitivity is a key causal factor.
Absolutely. And the evidence gets even sharper when you look closer. The meta-analysis found that interventions that specifically and exclusively focused on sensitivity, or those that demonstrably succeeded in improving observed sensitivity, had much larger effects on infant security.
How much larger?
Effect sizes jumped to D.39 and D.45, respectively. That's a much stronger impact. It really bolsters the idea that sensitivity is, as the researchers put it, the right ballpark for the hunt for causal mechanisms. We're looking in the right place.
That's encouraging. But there was another finding in those intervention studies that seemed odd.
Mm.
Something about the length of the intervention.
Ah, yes. That was quite counterintuitive. The research found that on average, briefer interventions tended to be more effective in boosting security rates, D equal 0.27, than longer, more intensive ones, D equal 0.13 to 0.18.
More isn't better. That seems backwards. Why would shorter be more effective?
It does seem strange at first glance. The researchers suggest it might be because shorter interventions are often highly focused, very targeted on specific skills, perhaps delivered at a key moment. Maybe longer interventions become diluted, or parents experience fatigue, or maybe they try to tackle too many things at once.
So quality and focus over sheer quantity.
That seems to be the implication. Short, sharp, sensitivity-focused interventions might be the most efficient way to promote secure attachment early on. It supports sensitivity's causal role, but again, it pushes us to understand the precise mechanisms better. How exactly does improved sensitivity translate into a more secure internal working model for the child?
Right. So putting it all together, we have this intergenerational transmission, confirmed but maybe more modest than first thought.
Yeah.
We have the transmission gap, suggesting sensitivity is key, but not the whole story. And we have this fascinating shift from environmental to genetic influence across development. It paints a picture of a really complex dance, doesn't it?
It really does. It's definitely not a simple, linear process. Attachment emerges from this dynamic interplay of the parent's history and state of mind, their current behaviors like sensitivity, the child's own characteristics, including their genetics, and the broader context, with the influence of these factors changing over time. It's incredibly intricate.
So let's try to wrap our heads around the key takeaways for today. We really dug into this idea of intergenerational transmission. We saw how the adult attachment interview first gave us that empirical link connecting a parent's narrative about their own childhood to their infant's attachment.
And we saw how decades of research, synthesized in large meta-analyses, confirmed this link is real, though maybe the effect size, that correlation, is closer to 0.3 rather than the initial 0.5 estimates. Still significant, but more nuanced.
And we tackled the mechanisms. Parental sensitivity is clearly crucial. Interventions prove that boosting sensitivity boosts security, but it doesn't explain everything, hence the transmission gap.
Right. And then the really striking finding about the changing role of genes and environment. Early on, that shared family environment seems paramount for attachment. But by adolescence, genetics appear to play a much larger role, around 40% of the variance, while shared environment effects seem to disappear.
That shift is just fascinating. It really highlights how dynamic development is. It all shows how these patterns can echo through families, shaping not just us, but potentially future generations through the legacy of those early relationships and internal working models.
It underscores that lasting ripple effect. How we make sense of our own past, how we relate now, it matters deeply for the next generation.
But this complexity, this shifting balance, the fact that interventions can work, it leads to a really important question, doesn't it?
It does. If the influences change over time, if patterns aren't entirely fixed by early experience, and if interventions can foster security, what does that mean for the stability of attachment within an individual's life?
Yeah. How much are we shaped by that early blueprint, and how much can things change later on? Are we destined to repeat patterns, or is there room for adaptation, for new experiences to reshape our attachment style as we go through life?
That's the critical question of stability versus change across the lifespan. How much continuity is there from infancy to adulthood?
That feels like the perfect place to leave it for today, and the essential question for our next deep dive. We are definitely not done exploring this. Please join us next time in Part 5 as we tackle exactly that, the stability of attachment over time, infancy to adulthood.
We'll see you then to continue the journey.